So good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. So this is the Policy Committee meeting for Tuesday, January 8th. I would like to call Trustee Agnew forward to open us with our prayer.
Thank you. Sign of our faith, in your Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, you make all things new. You bring hope alive in our hearts and cause our spirits to be born again. Thank you for this new year, for all the potential it holds. Come and kindle in us a mighty flame, so that in our time many will see the wonders of God and live forever to praise your glorious name. Amen.
Thank you. So moving on to item 2.1, approval of the agenda. May I have a mover? Trustee Duart. May I have a seconder? Trustee O'Brien. All in favor? Carried. So we'll move on.
Chair, can we have the vote?
I'm sorry?
How many in favor, how many against?
Oh, I'm sorry. So all were in favor? Does that, how do, so Trustee Intomasi, are you in favor of the approval of the agenda? So the motion carries. Thank you. So we're going to move, this is not on the agenda, but it will be moving forward. We need to have a declaration of any conflicts. There being none, we'll move on to item listed on the agenda as 2.2, the approval of the minutes of December 11th, 2018. May I have a mover? Trustee Duart. May I have a seconder? Trustee Carabella. All in favor?
I'm in favor.
Thank you. If seeing none opposed, the motion carries. Moving on to action items. Item 3.1, Policy I, Governance of Policy. We're going to call on Director Daly and Superintendent Ballo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of suggested changes to the governance of policy, I am suggesting one change. It's on page 2 of the document, and it's the second last bullet at the bottom of the page. A legal opinion shall be sought at the discretion of the director or designate for policies and the attendant administrative procedures prior to the policy committee's recommendation to bring forward a policy to the board for third and final reading and approval. In consultation, the current policy states in consultation with the director of the policy committee or an individual trustee can request a legal opinion. I'm suggesting that we strike an individual trustee only as it relates to the policy committee. So this doesn't have to do with legal representation around other legal matters, but I think if we're seeking a legal opinion on a policy matter, that it should come through a resolution in policy so the members of the board agree, because there is a financial cost to seeking out any legal opinions. So I think it should be agreed upon by the group before we move forward. That's the rationale for making that one change just to the governance of policy. So not with regards to what might be individual actions brought to the board, but when we're seeking out legal opinions strictly with regards to policy.
Can I jump in there now?
I believe we actually moved to the recommendation first before we open it. I believe we read the recommendation first before we open it to questions.
Correct, yes.
So I'll go ahead and do that, unless Superintendent Ballo, you have anything to add? No? Okay. And then we'll open it for questions. So I will now read the recommendation. So the recommendation is that the Policy Committee recommends that Policy I, Governance of Policy, be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15th, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. May I have a mover?
It has to be moved to get on the floor first.
So it has to be, okay, so it has to be moved to get on the floor first.
Okay.
For discussion, so. Trustee O'Brien. May I have a seconder? We'll open the floor for discussions. Okay, Trustee Dewar.
Question, Madam Chair, question to Director Daly. What is the history of the financial implications that you mentioned about regarding this?
I don't know if there's a history per se, but anytime we seek a legal opinion on any matter, whether it's with regards to policy or we're just seeking a legal opinion, there's a cost to it. So I think because, and depending on the nature of the legal opinion and how detailed it might be, costs incurred could be substantial. So as a result, I think it's something that the committee as a whole should probably have a conversation and pass a resolution on when we're seeking out legal opinions.
Do you have any statistics, Madam Chair, through you? Do you have any statistics about the cost incurred to have this change done? Has there been abuse of this in the past to kind of strike this out from the policy?
Not that I'm aware of. Typically at the board level, certainly at a board meeting when we're looking at incurring costs with legal, we would go through a motion at the board level as well with regards to legal opinions on other matters.
So we'll do Trustee Carabella and then Trustee O'Brien.
So I have two things. I was just from, does the director, through you, Madam Chair, to Director Daly, does the director have his own budget to seek legal advice for things that we might need?
The director has a budget. Legal falls in that budget. And legal fees can be substantial over any given year. Sometimes it depends on how many issues are brought. It depends on the complexity of the issues. The director needs a legal budget because I am bound to seek legal opinion and make sure that I can give adequate advice to the board, especially around whether things are in compliance with the Education Act or other related acts as well.
So we'll move on to Trustee O'Brien, and then we can come back to you, Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through Madam Chair to the Director, and thank you, Director Daly, for explaining that phrase being taken out, because I was going to ask that. And I do appreciate the fact that there is a cost involved with that is legal and could be quite costly. However, at the same time, since to make informed decisions, there are times when individual trustees may need to request a legal opinion, and to wait for it to go through a policy committee, I feel it may not allow a trustee to make a decision in a timely manner. So I really know that it would hardly ever be used, but to have that door open, I think, would allow us to make a decision in a timely manner and exercise good governance. Thank you.
Back to you, Trustee Carr. Do you still want the floor, Trustee Carabella?
Well, we can discuss what Trustee O'Brien, maybe this is a little pertaining to that, but I was going to follow up with our trustee budget that we have, the $3,000. Can we ever use that as for seeking legal advice?
I'm not sure I could give you a definitive answer. I'm not sure that would be, quite honestly, the best use of your trustee allocation of your money, but that's opinion more than legal opinion.
Trustee DeRosa. Trustee Carabella.
Through you, Madam Chair, would you like to explain the $3,000? The trustees have a budget each of us. I think the chair and the vice chair have more because they have other commitments that they take part of and expenses, but it was in the trustee orientation we did find out about that.
Through you, Madam Chair. The idea behind it is if we're seeking a legal opinion as a committee with regards to a specific piece of policy, that it should be passed through a resolution by the committee. Much like if we sought out a legal opinion in an arbitration case, for example, if the board was agreeing that they were going to consult or engage a lawyer, we would do it through a resolution.
I actually have a question first. So I just want to clarify, I believe it was Trustee Dewart who asked if there was any statistics. So just to clarify, so there were we had no case of legal opinions being sought in the last little bit that we can use as a comparison?
No.
Trustee Intomasi, you have the floor.
Through you, Madam Chair, as far as that particular policy, which is a governance policy, we cannot make that change. That particular right is given to us, the right to seek legal advice by the under the Municipal Act and the Provincial Act through the Education Act. The purpose of that particular right is to be able to question any policy that's passed, either if you're in a majority vote or a minority vote. If you're taking away that right, that would be going against the Municipal Act. As such, we do not have any right to take that away. We cannot do it under governance.
To you, Director.
I guess my only response to that, Trustee Ian Tomasi, would be if that's the feeling of the board, then the board doesn't support the motion or the recommendation that's on the table.
As a point of order, to remove the whole governance from tonight's business.
Could you ask Trustee Antomasi to repeat it, please?
Can you repeat that, Vince?
I would then, after we finish discussing it, put a motion forward to, as a point of order, to remove that particular business on governance from tonight's proceedings. We have only been on the job a month. You're asking us to go over governance policies which are beyond everybody at that board table, and it goes against municipal law. Municipal law precedes any board policies, and the Ministry of Education legislation precedes that in advance of it.
Thank you, Trustee Intomasi. Did you have a response?
I guess I would just suggest then that the policy committee not recommend that the policy go to the board meeting, and the current governance of policy that's in place remains in place.
Trustee Agnew.
So that's what I was just, so thank you for summarizing, Director Daly. That's what I was just going to say, is our option here just simply to do that then?
So do we have any further questions? Okay, so then we're going to move to the main position. So by show of hands, or do we want to go around the table? Show of hands, I think, is sufficient.
Can we record the vote, Madam Chair?
Yes, we can. So then we should go around. So we'll start with Trustee O'Brien.
We're voting on,
I'm going to repeat.
oh, sorry.
Okay, so whether or not we're in favor of the changes as proposed, which was the recommendation to change the governance policy as presented.
Right.
So are you in favor or opposed?
Opposed to the change.
Trustee Carabella?
Opposed.
Thank you. Trustee Murphy?
Opposed?
Trustee DeRosa? Thank you. Trustee Dewar?
Opposed.
Thank you. Trustee Agnew?
Opposed?
Thank you. Trustee O'Hearn Chernata?
Opposed.
Trustee Ian Tomasi? So the item is opposed. So the motion does not carry. It's defeated. Yeah. So we'll move on to item 3.2, which is policy I-07, protection of privacy. We have Ms. Vieira, the privacy and record manager, who will present for us. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I present the revisions to the policy. I speak to them in the commentary there, but the revisions are really to update the references so that they are current. It's really, we've removed some repetition that was in the policy before. I'm hoping to rescind the cross-panel sharing procedure, and I've also created a separate privacy breach procedure. Through you, Madam Chair, those are the recommendations I present for the policy revisions. Are there, I guess, do we have to put the motion forward? Okay, yes.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Vieira. So just for a point of clarity, just for everybody's information, and because I didn't quite get this because I was reading through, is the red, it means either added or deleted, and if it's anything noted in green, it means it's just moved within the document. So if that helps, because it helped me knowing that. So that being said, we'll put forward, I will now read the recommendation. The recommendation is that the Policy Committee recommends that Policy I-07, Protection of Privacy, be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15th, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Ian Tomasi. A seconder, Trustee O'Hearn. We'll open the floor for any questions. Trustee Dewar?
Madam Chair, question here. The changes that have been reflected in this document, are they mandated by the Education Act or by the government? I have two questions. This is the first part of it.
Ms. Vieira?
So yes, as a municipal organization, we are legislated by the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, as well as the Education Act does speak to privacy and records.
My second question, Madam Chair, is privacy is a big thing, and we all know that, and it's important. This document, has it been looked at by legal? Because there are legal implications to this. Do you think it's required, or has it been looked at in the past?
I can speak to that as well. There was the Privacy and Information Management Toolkit that was put together provincially by several school boards in the province. That was about 10 years ago now, and that was all legally vetted. So if you were ever to look at that document, you would see the privacy policy closely reflects that document that was legally vetted. So that's really where I build all of the tools that I'm going to present to the board over the next little while, is from that original toolkit. And provincially, I'm on the board of directors where we're updating that toolkit as well, so that it has more current issues that boards are dealing with around privacy and records.
Trustee Carabella?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So on page, see what it is here, page 5 of 6, which is 14 of the package. So there are some, the first three that are crossed out. Can you explain why you took those out? Because I would think that they should stay in the policy, or they could stay in the policy. I don't know why they have to be taken out, because there's sort of more of a broad idea that we want to reflect, not a particular procedure, a point of procedure.
I guess in procedure, that's really where we're actually raising that awareness. That's where we're building the capacity with the different things that we're putting in place around procedures. And again, back to that toolkit, that's really where I'm building that culture from. We're trying to embed that culture in our daily practices. So I think practice and procedure are hand in hand. At the highest level, I think the policy overarches what we do, but the procedure really tells us how to do it. So that's why I don't think it really belongs in your policy. I thought it's more in the procedures is where we're starting to implement all of these three things specifically. And that privacy breach, the third bullet there, talking about establishing a protocol, we've actually created a privacy breach procedure now, so that's why I struck that one for sure. We've created a privacy breach procedure. Moving forward, that's what I'm trying to say is I'm building procedures as we're going. I'm building processes as we're going. So I don't think we need to say that in the policy. We have a specific privacy breach procedure now. We're going to have, with the amendments to the privacy procedure also, I've included a routine collection use notice and disclosure to parents. So we're building that capacity with the parents as well. Around the first bullet there, raise awareness on the matters of public trust and confidence. I think by telling them how we collect, use, and disclose student information, we're doing that as well. So I think these are just redundant at this time because we are building those procedures.
Just to follow up, Trustee Carabell, thank you. Just to follow up, it's just that when it comes out of policy, then it comes out of our awareness because things happen in procedures and that we don't know happen. Actually, now come to think of it, what is the process for when changes are made in procedures because they're seen as operational, then we don't know things that happen that get changed or modified. So how do we know?
Well, we've included the procedure and all the modifications made to it, and we've included the change to the privacy breach procedure now as well. So I'm trying to be very transparent with everything I'm doing. It's all there in the procedures, and that the routine collection, use, notice, and disclosure actually, is the highest level of the procedure that really tells how we're using student information. I think that's really important. That was missing before. So if anything, I think I'm really putting procedures in place that we can operationalize throughout the system to build that privacy culture that we speak to in that bullet there. So I think through procedure, that's the way we're going to do it versus a higher level policy.
Trustee Agnew?
I just have a general question with respect to the policy piece, to the privacy piece. So when you commented about notifying parents around how the information will be gathered, stored, collected, utilized, do parents have the capability or right at any time to deny the use of any of that student information if they're not agreeing with how it's being utilized or how it's being distributed or who it's being shared by? Do they have the ability to
So a couple of things. A lot of what's included in the routine collection, use, notice, and disclosure is actually mandated by the Education Act. It's a consistent purpose of providing education for your child. We do give you that out if you're uncomfortable with anything that we mentioned in there. You have that right to speak to your child's principal, and if we can come to some type of agreement or work something out with you, that's the goal there. That's what we try to do. But generally, it's a consistent purpose of education, all the uses of information that I've highlighted in the procedure.
Is there any other questions? Sorry, Director Daly.
I think it's just worth noting that we do, when we do make changes to procedure, they are brought to board. They're brought as information, so, and I mean, we'll get to that a little bit later on in the agenda, but when we do change our procedures in terms of how we're implementing policy, we do bring them to board for information. So if there's a change, you would be aware of it.
Thank you. Trustee Intomasi, I was just going to say, Trustee Intomasi, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. So I do have a question if I have the floor.
You have the floor.
So do we have a template that we follow? That is that the policy committee, when they sit down to formulate a new policy and enact policy that comes down from the ministry, whereby there are certain checks that you go through before you formulate procedures and protocols, as opposed to just a policy statement and objectives within the policy statement itself?
Can you, Trustee Intomasi, can you the question. Can you just clarify what you're asking?
So what I'm asking is, when the Halton Catholic District School Board, their policy committee that vets the policies that come down from the ministry, they go through them. Do they have a format that they follow, a template? And through that procedure, when they review the procedures and protocols, do they vet it to the point where it's always going to be the same? It's a systematic approach of writing the policy, stating the objectives, and then how we're going to get to those objectives.
Okay, Superintendent Bob.
Through you, Madam Chair. So typically we would receive information from the ministry through a PPM, and we would use that information to update or generate a policy as required. So that's the overarching what you need to do as a board, and then as a board we develop our own individualized policies and procedures. Our policy, we do have a framework which is reflected in all of the policies that you have before you. So we always have, the name of the policy number, when the policy is adopted, the last review, the associated policies and procedures. We set right off the get-go what the purpose is of that policy, what's the application and scope of that policy, what the references are, and embedded in our references would be any reference to ministry PPMs or specific directives that were given to develop a policy. So I feel very confident that we do have a very consistent, and I think that's what you're asking about, template that we would use for developing and updating the policies that we have. It continues to outline the definitions, the principles and requirements that are mandated by us as a board who develop policy and pass policy. That's very consistent from policy to policy, and the same applies to our procedures. So if you look at the headlines in our procedures, they are all very much aligned to each other. Does that help? Thank you.
Follow-up question. Is it possible to make available to the new trustees that format that you follow? Share it with us so that as we go through these processes, we're in a better position to ascertain how that whole policy went together as we break it down and make passage of it.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the policies that you have before you, that you find on our site, outline all of the pieces that are already involved. So the framework of the policy is readily available to anyone. That policy review cycle that I had offered back in December as a guiding tool also provides some guidelines as to the new policy, the redundancy, and the changes that are made. As we update, and I did field a few questions, as we update our policies and our procedures for that matter, because they're open to questions, we can share with you, and we typically do, especially in the highlights in our action report, what the PPM is or what the new law is around, for example, we've been talking about cannabis, et cetera, and how those laws and how those legal aspects impact our policy. Another question is around our policy working group. So I did share with you at our first meeting that we do have a principal group that works on our policies, and through the red lines, that's where we develop some of the changes within our policies with that group or any of the staff that we have that are experts in the area in the board. So as we walk through, I'm very, satisfied to share those pieces with you, and I know that senior staff are as well, because I understand it's like the why, like how did we end up here, and sort of what are the points of reference, just so that you're more knowledgeable. And we're always open to those questions.
Well, after all, we're enacting it in law or in policy, and in that process, it would be very good that we walk through the same processes that the committee did in order to ascertain whether or not we're comfortable with approving the wording as you suggested or as it's been presented to us.
And through you, Madam Chair, that's typically what would happen as a committee is the committee would look at the existing policies, take a look at what the references are, for example, and see if there are any updates that need to be made with respect to any updates from the ministry or legal. So they would go line by line. Sometimes it's just a matter of looking at particular words that don't apply anymore, and that's why we have a review process, so we can make sure that we're using the most current language and the most current references throughout our documents. So we're happy to offer that as we review the policies with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm not sure who was first, so I'm gonna go
We're
go
privacy.
opposite this
Okay.
time. Trustee O'Brien, then Trustee Carabella.
Once the policies are done.
Through you, Madam Chair. So typically, procedures are written and revised by our senior staff and approved at the senior table and then shared as information items here through our policy committee. And again, it's senior staff, but it's also those who are experts in the area. So if we have someone like we have Sandra here this evening who's not a superintendent, but she's our privacy officer. So obviously, we would turn to our expert in that field to support us in developing a procedure that makes sure that we're meeting all of our legal requirements. And we also consult with legal accordingly. One of the policies that I updated this year was around medical conditions because of the new PPM 161. And I made a call to legal as well to make sure that we have the most current information and that we feel confident in the policies and the procedures that we're updating. But procedures will come to this meeting as an information item, but that doesn't mean that it's not open to question or clarification. That's why we send them to you in advance of the meeting with the hope and expectation that you'll review them.
So, sorry, it's Trustee Intomasi. We've got Trustee Carabella next, and then Trustee O'Brien, and then we can move back to you. Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I guess maybe what we're wondering too is your policy committee, is who is on that policy committee that you work with, because maybe the others don't know, and I'm not sure who exactly is on it this year.
Yep. So, through you, at our first policy meeting in September, the Board of Trustees received a list of all of the members that are on that committee, and I'm thinking right now if we had shared that with you in December, but it lists the principals and vice principals from the elementary panel and secondary, because we want a cross-section of people representing the varying policies and procedures because they have varying experiences with them. So a list is provided, and that is the committee that comes together to review most of our policies and procedures. If it has nothing to do with them, like finance, for example, not that it doesn't, it does trickle down, but we would have the financial department be responsible for the review and development of that policy and procedure, because that's their area of expertise. But from a school services, academic, day in, day out operation of our school, it's our principal and vice principal working group that's involved. So we do have a list. I'm happy to share that with anyone who would like to have that, and we can have it for the next meeting. But it is shared every September, as well as that work plan that I did provide to you, which is a 3-year cycle. So it shows you the last 2 years, which policies and procedures were under review, as well as what's under review for this year. And we're currently working on the next 3-year cycle so that we can share that with you as well at a future meeting.
Thank you. Trustee O'Brien?
Sure. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So once policy goes to senior staff procedure, it goes to the board for information. If we see an inconsistency between the procedure and the policy, can we vote on that? Is there, just come to us, I'm asking this open, can we kind of fine tune that here?
Through you. So I'm hearing two different questions. I think the first question was, can we vote on that? It is an operational matter, is the procedure, but is there discussion to be had? Yes. That's why we have a policy committee meeting, and that's what this opportunity is to have discussion and ask questions and provide input, I suppose, if there's something that needs to be brought to our attention for advisement.
Director Daly.
Yeah, I think in that point, certainly around the procedural piece, it's an opportunity to comment, to ask questions, to make suggestions. But administrative procedures are not voted on by the board. Policies are voted on by the board.
Trustee Ian Tomasi.
Yeah, I agree with that. So through you, Madam Chair, a follow-up question. Since it's our role as trustees to approve policies, it would only stand to reason that, and given that we're new trustees and we weren't there in September, that we be given the list of who participates at the policy level internally. And furthermore, I think it would help us if we were to have, again, a template on how the policy went together. I understand that the policies come down from the ministry to us, and then it gets vetted by the people that exercise those policies. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that are approving them. So we should be as conversant with what that policy intent is as those who are putting the policies together.
Thank you, Trustee Ian Tomasi. So some deliverables, are we able to?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. I think, and I think this speaks to the maybe all of the trustees' questions, and we are still considering. We do have a recommendation on the table. We've kind of gotten off that a little bit, but anyway, in terms of the level of detail around the procedure and the background and the knowledge around the policy, it's really, to be quite honest with you, it's a little bit of us as a senior team getting a sense of what level of detail you want, and the ability to ask questions and to walk you through it. Different boards, depending on whether it could be experience or number of years in the role or their own particular standpoint, may or may not want a level of detail. I think that's something that we'll come to as we go through the process as a board, getting an understanding of what you need in order to make the best decisions you can and how we can best provide that to you as a senior staff.
Yeah, I was only referring to, through you, Madam Chair, to our secretary, I was only referring to the policy element of it, the procedures and protocols. That's something that's pretty much a given, and it's pretty much standard. So it's really the front end that I'm more concerned about.
Okay, so as Director Daly said, I think what we should do is refocus back onto the motion that's on the table, and I think maybe there's something that we can talk about in camera in regards to some more details that we may require as a board that can be delivered before the next policy meeting. So that being said, I'm going, if there's no further questions, I'm going to go back to the recommendation, or return to the main motion. Can we have we'll do a show of hands. All in favor? Do you want me to reread the motion? Okay. So this is that the Policy Committee recommends that Policy I-07, Protection of Privacy, be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15th, 2019 regular board meeting for approval, as presented by Ms. Vieira. So, all in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. Motion carried. So we'll move on to item 3.3. Sorry, just gotta get my paperwork here. So item 3.3, so I call on Superintendent Crowell, if you could discuss. Thank you.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm pleased to present the action report for Policy 2-39, Progressive Discipline and Safety in Schools Code of Conduct, Suspensions and Expulsions. Provided some commentary there for you. Some highlights. So it was reviewed last in June 2016. The bulk of the changes are with regards to the updated cannabis legislation, Smoke-Free Ontario Act. So we've made changes reflecting in those changes in our policy. In order to align to the currency policy template, we've removed the references out of the purpose section, put them where they should be. We've made specific changes to align with wording in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. We found some bullets in the requirements section that were duplicated, so we just removed those. And we've also made some changes to better align with the revised PPM 145 on progressive discipline and promoting positive student behavior.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and read the recommendation that the Policy Committee recommends that policy II-39, Progressive Discipline and Safety in Schools, Code of Conduct, suspension and expulsions be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15th, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. May I have a mover?
I'll move it.
Trustee Agnew, may I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Trustee Antomasi. We'll get you in so they know you're here. So I will now open it for discussion. Trustee Agnew.
So through you, Madam Chair, I just have a question on page 22. So it's just with, and I'm going to get probably messed up a little bit because of the green and the red and the strikeout and the black and the...
Sure.
But I just wanted to ask a question. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points down there where it says respect and treat others fairly regardless of, for example. And I see that we've added in some language and taken out some language.
Yeah.
And most of them I see are fairly consistent with each other, but I notice that disability has been taken out and not put back in.
Yeah, we tried to align that with the language that was in PPM 128 and 145. It says for example, so it's not exclusive, it's not limiting those. We were just trying to align with the language that was there.
Would we be able to put that back in? Is that a
Yeah.
problem? It's just to see it taken out and then not replaced, just when the other ones seem to be replaced.
Sorry, Director Dale. I actually have a clarifying question as well, but I'll allow you to.
I think in that case, for that line, if it's the will of the board that you'd like it put back in, I think we can put it back in.
Are you okay with adding that back in?
So we'll make note that be changed in the policy so that it's no longer struck, but it's actually, so that's on page 20? Yeah, okay. So that disability be placed back under that bullet point? Do we need to?
Page,
It's actually page 20.
20.
Yeah, you said 22, yeah.
Sorry, 2151 is what I was looking at.
It's page 20. It says page 3 of 13, is that page 20? Yeah. So that's the fifth bullet point?
oh, that's,
Yes, that you're going to make that amendment. No. With that amendment.
Any other questions? Okay, so I will now return to the main motion, so I'll reread it. So that the Policy Committee recommends that policy II-39 as amended, Progressive Discipline and Safety in Schools, Code of Conduct, suspension and expulsions be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15th, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. All in favor?
I'm in favor.
Okay, opposed? Okay, trustee, okay. So do we need to, we should record it, so maybe we'll go around and do it that way, it might be easier. So trustee O'Brien?
Opposed.
Trustee Carabella?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Trustee Murphy? Favor. Trustee DeRosa?
Favor.
Trustee Dewart?
Favor.
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee O'Hearn? Oh, Trustee Antomasi?
In favor.
So that's 6 in favor, 1 abstained, and 1 opposed. The motion is carried. So, moving on to item 3.4. Sorry, I just lost my page as I did that. This is policy 5-17, request for promotion and distribution of program activity related to materials through board schools, and Superintendent Ballo.
Through you, Madam Chair, we have the action report there that speaks to the policy. It's item 3.4. And the purpose is to provide for the consideration of the Policy Committee the revisions to Policy V17, Request for Promotion and Distribution of Program Activity-Related Materials. The policy has very minimal changes. It was adopted in 2016. It's been reviewed in keeping with the current policy review cycle. It was up for review at the 3-year mark. A very minor change was made to clarify requests that involve students. The revised policy is attached for your review and consideration.
Thank you, Superintendent Fallow. So I will now read the recommendation we will be voting on this evening, that the Policy Committee recommends that Policy V-17, Request for Promotion and Distribution of Program/Activity-Related Materials through board schools be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. May I have a mover? I was going to call you Superintendent again. Trustee Dewar. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Carabala. I'll open the floor for questions. Trustee Carabala.
Through you, Madam Chair. Are the sports camps and things like that, are they considered nonprofits, or are there materials in our schools?
Through you, Madam Chair, it really depends on the provider. So we do have some providers that work through the school board, varying providers. Some offer opportunities that are not-for-profit to subsidize other students. So we do look at them case by case. Some are run through the town of Burlington or the town of Oakville. So we do monitor, but we're also mindful to not limit opportunities, especially for sports and athletics.
Any other questions? Trustee Carabella.
Through you, Madam Chair, have we had any feedback from parents or anything regarding the materials that is arriving at home that we can know about?
I've not had any feedback, and we really don't approve a lot of materials. We're very conscientious with respect to what we are approving for distribution.
All right, just one more question. And when they're approved for distribution, they're distributed to all schools. Is that correct?
It depends on the materials. Sometimes if they're local to an area, then it would just go out to Burlington. Materials are sent to the principal with a cover letter that says whether or not they've been approved through our office, and then it's at the discretion of the principal still at that point if they want to disseminate the information in their particular school. So even if it's been approved, the principal can make that local decision to determine if it's a good fit for their school.
So there could be some schools, even side by side, one may receive the information and one may not receive the information.
That's right.
Trustee Carabell.
Thank you. And the distribution, it's through the emails mostly, is it, or is it paper things, or it depends on the material?
It's typically not through our board center. We don't use that for distribution, so typically it's a paper copy, or it may be, I know sometimes schools are doing weekly memos, so they may include a blurb in there or a little link, but we're not sending it via center.
Trustee Dewar.
Madam Chair, question to Superintendent. I've used this system in the past and it works very well, but just for the benefit of all the trustees, could you explain the process? Like somebody sends a document to you for approval. How does the principal know that the document has been approved, and how do they discern whether it's to be distributed to the school or not?
Through you, Madam Chair, the principal knows that it's been approved because they get a cover letter from my office that says whether it's been approved or not. So unless they have that cover letter, then they will not distribute the information. We keep track of anyone who has been approved or denied. We have a spot on our website on StaffNet that all staff have access to. So, and as a principal, I went to it always because you get a lot of people that come to the door and drop off flyers or have, wonderful things that they're trying to promote. So it does list what's been approved and what has been denied. So if it's on the denial, it's a no-go, and if it's on the approved, then it's at the discretion of the principal to disseminate that information.
Sorry, just another question. Just back to the point about when it comes to the discretion of the principal, and I completely understand that, but is there another avenue to let parents know that these programs are available, that this information has been disseminated. If the principal has chosen not to distribute that to their school, like, do we have a place on our website that, because again, I'm just struggling with, you've got two schools that might be 3 kilometers apart, and one student's come home with information on a program and the other students are not. So is there an area where parents can actually go and see what has been approved from a board perspective that may not have necessarily flowed through that particular principal?
Through you, Madam Chair, we don't have, as far as I'm aware, a spot on our board public website where we would share that information. I can tell you for the most part, and generally speaking, once principals receive the letter from our office saying it's been approved, they tend to share the information. I've not really not shared that information as long as it's been approved, but it is part of the process that is at their discretion, but I'd say typically they would share the information. Nothing's come to my attention where there's been a glaring disparity between two schools.
Madam Chair, another question, just a question. Does this policy allow people with this request to go and approach a principal directly and ask them to distribute the material?
Anyone can approach a principal. The policy keeps the principal from making that local decision at the school, and a principal would say there is a policy in place, you need to follow the policy, which would include completing the form, and the forms are included in the procedure part of this package, and it needs to be approved at the board level.
Sorry.
So, Trustee Duart has it, and then Trustee Antomasi will go to you.
The same question I did not explain very well. Once you approve, and the principal gets a letter, and they do not act on it, can a party go to the principal and ask them to request them to spread the message out?
They can, but again, it's at the discretion of the school principal. Unless there's a pressing issue, I think typically principals are pretty cooperative. But at the end of the day, it would go back to their discretion.
We're going to do Trustee Antomasi, and then we'll go to Trustee O'Brien.
To you, Madam Chair. So it seems to me that particular policy contradicts itself. The reason it contradicts itself is we go through the trouble of having senior administration approve any correspondence that's handed or is allowed to be handed out or disseminated, and then we turn around and say, but the principal has final say. That, for me, it doesn't work. So I think at some point we have to say, if we allow this, then it should be disseminated. It shouldn't be left up to the principal.
Superintendent
So
Bell.
in other words, the policy doesn't meet its objective. It contradicts itself.
Superintendent Bell.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the intent of the policy is to set guidelines for making the decisions to approve or not from a big picture perspective. It's in the procedure where the requirement is listed. It's number 3 in the procedure under the requirements, and it says all requests for distribution of material related to fundraising events shall be submitted to the appropriate school principal for review and approval. So I hear what you're saying. I think the essence of the policy is to make those decisions around whether or not it falls within our guidelines. And at the end of the day, the principal is the person that is the frontline professional in that building that needs to make those final decisions.
Yeah, I beg to differ. As such, I would probably move to write that and make it mandatory that he disseminate that information if it's been approved by the board. That would be very much like the whole issue around fundraising. We're sort of spreading back into that sort of gray area or slippery slope. So I would probably say that we need to change that. And
we've got trustee O'Brien next and then trustee DeRosa. Trustee O'Brien.
I would have to agree with trustee Tomasi on that. I think a centralized list that we would have access to and all principals would follow it, I think that would be more consistent, and I would have to agree with him.
Trustee DeRosa?
I believe there was a comment made that most principals do follow the recommendations and do distribute the material. That's the actual practice. So in practice, there doesn't seem to be any confusion about distributing the material in question. My question is, when a principal decides that he's not going to distribute the material, does it put anybody aware of that, or it just...
Well, through you, Madam Chair, they would make the decision not to, and it wouldn't be shared. In my experience, that's not been the case. This has not been a pressing issue that principals are not sharing that information. It's only come up as a topic of discussion. So, yeah, if the principal decides that they don't want to share the information, then they don't have to share the information. The purpose of the policy is to guide them and to give them sort of that consent piece to provide the information to let them know that it has been approved.
I got a follow-up.
And I hear what you're saying, and whether the principal distributes or not is not within the policy. It's embedded in the procedure, which is the outcome of the policy.
Sorry, trustee Tomasi, we've got trustee Murphy who's going to go next.
Not to contradict my fellow trustee, and he's almost like a distant relative. I love him that much. I think I would be you got a brother. I would be concerned that we are overstepping our bounds as trustees and trying to micromanage a principal who understands his community and sees the value in the program. We're talking about promotional programs. If he doesn't think chocolate chip cookies will sell in his school, then what right do we have to force him into that situation? I think we're overstepping our bounds.
If I may, is it something that instead of looking at it as if this happens, how about if we looked at it from a different perspective to say if there ever was a time where that did happen, and it hasn't happened, so we've never had to deal with it, that there's some sort of mechanism for somebody to go and question why it wasn't distributed. That might be an easier solution as opposed to looking at it by changing a procedure or a policy.
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry, I had just asked a question in regards to instead of making a change to a policy or to the procedures, maybe looking at it that as if somebody came forward with a concern and said, a principal didn't do this, is there a mechanism to review it to find out why?
Okay, but you're bringing in another question. We should be following the question that was being deliberated. That should be raised after we exhaust the questioning.
It's all part of the same question as opposed to the change, because it's procedural. We're actually talking about that procedural that as trustees, we actually don't have governance over. It's brought to us for information.
No, we have governance over policy. So a policy should be universal. And once you make a policy universal, then people can opt out of it. Otherwise, it's not a policy.
So I'm Director Gill.
I would suggest that the purpose of the policy is not to allow individual schools to opt out of something. The policy is really to manage probably the flow of requests that come to the school. Certainly as a secondary school principal, I was inundated with requests on a weekly basis from a number of outside organizations regarding fundraising or access to students or establishing programs or promoting programs. I think really the policy just says that there are certain requirements that outside organizations have to follow, that they have to meet. Once that's approved, they can approach the school, have the conversation with the school principal. If the school principal decides that a particular program, it could be based on conversation with the school council, it could be based on their knowledge of the makeup of the school, the demographic of the school, the economics of the school, whatever the case is, then the principal would either decide to go forward or not. I don't think there's anything that stops the group that's brought forth the proposal. They're aware it gets approved, that they can go to the principal and say, hey, I know that this was approved by the board. Is there a reason why you don't see it as a fit for your school?
Trustee DeRosa.
What has been the actual experience of a principal not opting to carry through with the recommended communication? Has there been an exception that we know has caused a major problem of sorts?
Through you, Madam Chair, I've not had anyone call me this year to say that they're upset that materials aren't being sent, like someone who's been approved from that perspective. And as Director Daly said, the principal's making that decision around, you know, the socioeconomic, school council interests that year. It has not arisen in my experience as an issue. That's just been my experience.
Trustee O'Hearn Chernoda, and then we're going to go to Trustee Carabella, and then we'll come back to you, Trustee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair to Superintendent. I don't want to belabor this issue because we've talked about it a lot. However, I don't think we should handcuff the principals because maybe they're short-staffed that one day and they can't get that literature out, and then we slap their hands and say, well, we told you to send it out and you didn't, right? But also, on the other hand, I like that, and it is operational, so this is just a suggestion, take it for what you will, is that maybe if programs are vetted down to the principals and they decide for whatever reason the council, that they just reply and say, hey, we didn't do this because of this. That's all. Just a suggestion.
Trustee Carabella? No, I didn't have one. Oh, I'm sorry. So then Trustee DeRosa.
I would concur with that. We have to leave a certain degree of discretion with the principals, primarily because I would think that most of the requests come directly to them first. Right? So they need the flexibility to make that judgment with the guidance of the policy, of course.
Trustee Antomasi, did you still?
Yes. So, Madam Chair, through you to the Superintendent Bello, it seems to me that if we're making the policy statement, then we're only, as trustees, dealing with the policy statement. The procedural part, although it belongs to the Halton Catholic District School Board to deliver, it's the policy that governs it. So our decision here is only about the policy. So we include the discretion to the do we give discretion to the principal or do we not give discretion to the principal? I remind everybody, we're only voting on the policy, not the procedures.
Trustee Murphy.
I would ask the question, do we have authority to discern what the principal's responsibilities are? And in my opinion, we don't.
So I think we've kind of veered off of what the changes are and presented on the policy. So I think we need to go back to the motion. I think a vote will determine whether or not how we move. So that being said, I'll reread the motion that the policy committee recommends that policy V-17, request for promotion and distribution of program activity-related materials through board schools, be forwarded along with amendments to the January 15, 2019 regular board meeting for approval. I'll start with Trustee O'Brien. Thank you. Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Murphy?
In favor?
Thank you. Trustee DeRosa?
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Dewar?
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee O'Hearn Chernoda? Thank you. Trustee Antomasi?
Abstain.
That brings us into discussion items. That's the end of our action items. So under discussion items 4.1, policy development, so under optional programs, Trustee Carabella, I ask that you state our point, and then we'll have some discussion to determine if the item is something that needs to be brought forward to future policy committee meetings.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to you all trustees. So I'm proposing that we consider and have a discussion about having a policy in place that would be for optional programs. And what brought this about is the recent extended French, what happened with St. Matthew's extended French program, and realizing that there was no policy that was linked to the procedure around the optional French programs. And I think what we're seeing is that it was just a procedure, so there's no policy, and we had no input on some of the things that can happen. And I think that procedures should be attached to a policy so that we can have an impact on governing them. I think that a policy on optional programming would be interesting and useful, and we've gone through many programs that have been established very successfully at the school, and I'm sure they followed protocols, and there was a method to it, a purpose and a mission that they align with our mission. We've had the AP program, the IB program, and other programs. So how were those started? Was there the item brought forward to the trustees at some point, and were the board given the approval to go ahead and to vet the whole project, whether it would be successful and not, and what was the determining criteria to put forward that program? We maintain the programs. We have pilot programs. There could be pieces governing pilot programs, how long they last, and what's the threshold if they're not successful? How do we phase it out? Then there's just phasing out other programs or canceling a program or phasing out a program, and those ones would be good to have policy around that, giving parents adequate notice for phasing out a program or relocating a program, so that there would be some timelines and expectations that parents or stakeholders could grab onto in a policy, and that we could also be transparent and give parents, mostly parents, a lot of forewarning, or that it's clear that they don't have, that we can change things, that referring them to the procedure. I think that programs are very impactful for our community of stakeholders and parents, the AB, the AP, IB programs, and that's really who our first level of contact as trustees are as well, our constituents, and this would give us a chance to have input on that. People say, well, this would be a good program, and we could have a way to bring that idea forward. And so those are sort of my ideas. I think, and as I said, the history that I've experienced has been around the French program. So with the early French immersion program, there was a committee meeting over the summer. I think they met 3-4 times. I was on that committee, and I thought that parents knew that we are reviewing the early French immersion program. But then when it came to our board as a staff report and then to vote on, and that's when parents found out about it again and were surprised that their program that their children were in was being phased out without their knowledge. And again, it happened now at St. Matthew's, and a bit more disconcerting is that if we look to the June board meeting, that they were given notice, which was great. They were given notice that it would happen, the long-term capital plan, in the year, I forget now which one, 21, 22. So, but then it got switched to a lot earlier, and that's what I think a policy would avoid something like that happening, that we would be able to... Yeah. Sorry. I didn't talk very much this whole... Yeah. Yeah. I'm almost done. Oh, I'm sorry, Vince. So, I'll just speak closer to the microphone. So that's what I was thinking, that we have an idea, we have a policy that the procedure could be attached to, that can help programs be more transparent and accountable to the stakeholders. Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Carabala. We'll open for some discussion. Vince, do you have a question? We're opening it for, Trustee Antomasi, do you have
Yeah, so precedent for the people there. Nobody has a question, then I will ask my question.
Yeah. So I'm just opening it to questions. So does anybody have a question? Any questions? Trustee DeRosa. I'm sorry, Trustee DeRosa, is that a direct question to Trustee Carabella?
Thank you for that question, Trustee DeRosa. I would say that having a policy, as we've seen, gives us the opportunity to govern. And when things are taken out of policies and into procedures and become operational, it's not that we want to have control over operational things, and I use the word control, I don't mean that. I mean that we can govern and we can represent what the stakeholders also expect of us to be involved with and be able to vote on things. So I think a policy would be beneficial. I'm open to staff working on it and taking the same way that we're seeing things taken out of policy into procedures. Some of the things in these procedures could be moved into a policy. And I did do some research, other school boards, and they have like a policy for their French immersion program. It's actually a policy, not just a procedure. And so I don't think it's impossible. I think it's something that would be good and that could help us and help the stakeholders.
So we've got a few. So I believe Trustee O'Hearn-Chernoda, then we'll go Trustee Agnew, Trustee O'Brien, Trustee Duart, Trustee DeRosa. Yes, I did.
Thank you, through the chair, to Director Daly. There is no policy attached to this procedure in this reference. Has there ever been that you're aware of, or is there a reason why it's not? Things that maybe we don't know?
I wouldn't be able to answer what the back story to it is. I think what really, in a broader sense, what should guide programming decisions is the strategic plan of the board. So when we decide on what areas we may want to expand in or what programs we may want to promote, I think they would typically come to this table when there's some cost implications. So for example, the IB program, it's a costly program, so it has budget implications. So that's probably where that conversation happened, not necessarily a policy, but around the board table within the context of setting our strategic priorities and then how we're going to support them through the budget. I think it's I don't know if problematic's the word, but addressing a policy because of maybe a specific incident that has come up or a response to a specific incident is maybe not the best route to go. In terms of, and Trustee Carabella did say part of the genesis of this was the decision to relocate a regional French program from one school to another in the same municipality. in terms of the opency and transparency, and I hope I've expressed this to ratepayers that could that decision have been communicated better or in a different way? It could have been. Is that something that, for me personally, I've learned going forward? Yes. But I think at the same time, because it was an operational decision, the decision would have been made regardless. I think it's also important to know that when we're talking about parents knowing, parents did know or reasonably should have known through the application process and the information that we put out with regards to extended French in particular, that those programs are subject to being moved. And they always have been since they've been implemented. It may have been different in the St. Matthews circumstance because the program has been there so long. You might not pay as much attention to that as maybe to a municipality where there's lots of growth and programs change a lot because new schools are being built. So around the communication around that, could that have been done in a different way? I think so, yeah.
Sorry, is it?
It's a follow-up.
Okay, we're going to go through
Sure.
and then we'll come back to you, sorry. Trustee Egg.
So, thank you. So, through you, Madam Chair, so so thank you, Helena, for starting the conversation. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about the communication piece. So, recognizing that there is that piece there that does say that at any time, we have it in the plan, but at any time we can change that. And I agree, it was an operational decision. I struggle a little bit, though, with that communication piece. And I know that we recognize now that perhaps the communication wasn't the best that it could have been or the time frame, but how do we address that moving forward? So how do we avoid a situation again where there is a decision that's made around an optional program or relocation or whatever that might be, and ensuring that communication is provided with adequate time for those parents to make different decisions or to, I think that was a big piece of this, was parents just didn't know it was coming in a timely fashion. And I just wondered, I know we recognize now that was perhaps not handled the best, but then what do we do moving forward? Just a question.
So, are we looking for, or just to keep a discussion? Okay. So then maybe what we'll do is we'll continue with the question and discussion and then maybe see if there's any other points to that. We're on to Trustee O'Brien, but then I notice Trustee Murphy now is added to the list. And then you're still on. You're all still on in order. So I've got Trustee O'Brien, Trustee Dewart, Trustee DeRosa, back to Trustee O'Hearn, and then Trustee Murphy. So Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Trustee Carabell, for bringing this up. The point that you made that really sticks with me is the fact that most of our procedures do come out of policy. And this procedure is a bit in a vacuum, because when parents did come to us, the policy gives the procedure that foundation that we can speak to. So when we don't have the policy that backs up the procedure, I find the communication piece is harder. I didn't know what to say to them either. So if we're going to have a procedure, to have a policy, to me, gives it that strong foundation that keeps it solid and lets us speak to it, and I think we would be able to have better communication with parents if we did. Thank you.
So we're on, thank you, Trustee O'Brien. Trustee Dewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment here. We had this issue in Oakville. It probably could happen in Burlington or Milton. Just that Milton is new and people are getting not used to being settled in one school, but it could happen anywhere else. As Director Daly said, strategic plan of board trumps everything. Okay, but I'm sure that a reasonable time of 1 year should be a good time when the strategic plan of the board is in place, and a year's notice given to people. I think that should be fair. That gives parents the opportunity to make decisions whether to move homes or change schools, something like that.
Thank you, Trustee Dewart. When you say, so maybe for clarification, when you say a year, are you making reference to a school year, an entire year?
Yes, an academic year.
Thank you. So we're on to Trustee DeRosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think that there is anyone who would not say that maybe the communication piece could have been handled a lot better, but we recognize that. We've acknowledged it. But the crux of the decision is, at the end of the day, the validity of the decision is also something that has to be recognized. Other than the fact that this remains a decision that's reached by the staff who are responsible for making programming decisions and who are responsible for the operation. The decision to move the program is still a valid one in my view. And to voice my colleagues' sentiments about the fact that this could be happening anywhere. It's got Halton-wide implications. We put our trust in the staff to exercise the competences that they have, the many years of expertise that they have in this. We have to let them do their job. And at the same time, I would say that we do acknowledge that the communication piece will be improved and can be improved. I don't know that a year's notice is adequate, inadequate. We can have that discussion. What is the ideal time to give notice of certain things happening? The other thing I'd like to recognize is that the St. Matthew's experience is being grandfathered. It's grandfathered over a certain period of time to limit the impact. So there was an original intent to soften the impact with the parents and their kids who are currently in the program. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Trustee DeRosa. Trustee Sina, I don't know, is that a demotion? I see you.
Sorry, just a comment that, it's not my role to limit discussion here by any means. I think the point of discussion is whether or not we should be thinking about a policy around optional programming as opposed to reviewing decisions made regards to extended French at St. Matthew's and other schools. There's a notice of motion that'll be, I think, discussed in some detail at our next board meeting. So I'm just kind of putting that out there.
So maybe what we can do is we can bring it back to Trustee Carabella's original proposal, which is to put it to, sorry, Trustee Antomasi, that we put it back to the discussion point, which is creating a policy. So that being said, we still have Trustee O'Hearn-Ternova who's up, and I've got Trustee Murphy, if you still have any points of discussion in regards to this. Okay.
Sorry, just very quickly, and thank you, Trustee Carabella, for bringing it up, because I think it's brought up some points. Just looking at it in a different lens, it may not be adding a policy for procedure for optional programs. It may be, and sorry, lack of my ignorance, enhancing a current policy we have for communication, so that the information is there. How do we get our families and our stakeholders to have a confirmation of understanding? Because I think that can be the root cause of this. That's all. Just FYI.
Director Daly, you want to?
I don't disagree. I think in this particular circumstance, parents are upset that the program's being moved from their school. I think that's at the crux of it. Whether we said we were going to do it this year or next year or 3 years from now, that's what they're upset about, and I don't deny that they're not legitimate in feeling upset about what where their children are going to receive extended French programming. So again, I think we're we're talking about a policy or potential policy that's come about as a result of an issue that's been brought up at one specific school, and that doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered as a policy. But again, I think making policy based on what's been maybe a bad experience, to make an overarching policy, something we want to think about. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, it's just something that we want to think through. I think it's also important to consider when you're thinking about policies, and then, and I'm not, because we're just in discussion, if we're talking about trustees determining where a program's going to go or not going to go, that's a problematic decision for trustees.
Thank you. So we've got Trustee Murphy and then Trustee Guzzo. And
I'm quite excited to get the floor after wading through all of those very, very eloquent and worthy comments. Trustee Carabello, I understand the genesis of the idea. The trouble I'm having getting my head around it is a policy regarding special programs. Let's face it, we don't have unlimited funding. If we have a policy, then that would impact on special programs. To me, that would impact our regular track, and it would be at the cost of our regular track students. So I think I understand the concept behind it. I just don't see how we would be able to make that work. Again, we'd be making decisions that are out of our area of responsibility, and we really don't have the background information to make those decisions, and the impact that it would have on our regular track. The reality of what happened is in Milton there was a change. Milton, there's been 4 or 5 changes to the extended French program. There hasn't been one complaint. Georgetown, there's changes. There hasn't been one complaint. You could have, with all respect to the St. Matthews parents, you could have given them 5 years' notice. The exact same thing would have happened. So if we're trying to put policy together based on special interests, we're going to have a problem. It's going to be a mess. So I think we have to, we have to strip the emotion away from it. Yes, we're empathetic to the impact it had on these people and the impact of their lives. But the reality is, if we're looking at our area of responsibility overall, it would be, I think, very challenging to have a special program policy. I think there's too many impacts or tentacles that would come out from that policy, and I think it would be very hard to manage and to control.
thank you, Trustee Murphy. I have a couple of questions, and it's raised from what you brought forward, Trustee Carabella. And because I didn't understand exactly what the discussion item is, I can now ask the questions. You say there's no policy linked to this. So what specifically are you looking at in notification? Like, what are you looking to be linked to a policy? And then I would put it to Superintendent Bowell if there is anything that is linked to a policy or a procedure.
I think the aspect of the communication is important, that we have something. Okay, so it happened at St. Matthew's, but it was also St. Mary's. It can happen anywhere. I think it's just a way that programs, they're important, and what we do with them at the school board and for our stakeholders, I just, and then doing research and seeing that other school boards do have policy on their French immersion program, so it can't change unless it comes through the board. So so for example, the policy got changed on October 1st, 2018. On October 1st, 2018, the procedure got changed. And what was changed in the procedure was that instead of having signing up for French in January and February, it got switched to signing up in November. And parents, and then, so then all of a sudden they get an email in October telling them to sign up for their French immersion or extended French programs, where they're usually were doing it in January and February, and that was their mindset. And some of the comments I've heard was that they didn't even have time for their children to experience French and talk to the teacher to get a good sense of if this is a good program for their children. So that's just an example of something changing in the procedures that impacts the stakeholders and impacts us, because then they come to us, and impacts the program that we didn't know about, and we didn't know about it and couldn't know about it. And I think that if it was a policy that, you know, any timelines that are changed, that we are notified, maybe just as information items, but that we know about it and that we can prepare and make sure that the parents are given enough time to work with what they get. And even writing down that they don't have an option, you know, that having that in a policy is a valid thing to say, that it's left to the discretion of the, you know, the same as the wording in that procedure, that's left to the discretion of the senior staff. If it's in policy, it has a lot of weight too. And then we just say, well, you know, they bring us items as information, they want to start this program here, and there's the money for it, the budget, and it goes ahead. I don't think I like the idea also in the policy of having that aspect of programs lining up to the strategic planning. I think that's an important piece that could come out in the policy. And I'm not saying that that we have to make decisions on where programs go, because we don't have the expertise that the staff has doing all the background work and the statistics and, you know, where's the best place for it. It's just that it would just be brought to us and be stated there in the policy.
Director Daly, you had a comment or response?
I did, I forget.
So my question, sorry, but my other part of that was, is there nothing that we can say that's linked to the original question that she had asked, which is it's part of procedure on how it's done, how notice is going out?
Well, again, I understand that the experience with extended French at St. Matthew's is I guess kind of the most germane one. Trustee Carabella did mention St. Mary's too, and French immersion. I think it's a couple of things. So in terms of the long-term plan and citing the plan, I think there's been also some confusion around what an accommodation review is and what a program review is. They're not the same thing. I think we are on the road to creating a policy around greater public engagement. That might be a place where how we communicate or that sort of thing, that might be a place where that communication piece comes in.
Trustee O'Brien?
Director Daly, if there was a policy during that time period that specifically said our main thrust is main programming, optional programming is at the discretion of the director, this was a policy that was voted on by an elected board, do you not think you would have more weight in dealing with the public on that issue? Thank you.
would it have taken some of it off of me and put it onto the trustees? Yes. But I'm certainly not seeking that. I appreciate that, but in terms of would it take it off of my shoulders and put it on your collective shoulders, I guess it would, but I'm pretty confident and I shouldn't say confident. I'm comfortable with the decisions that senior staff arose at with regards to extended French, with regards to the rationale behind why we made those changes, both in Oakville and in our other municipalities. I think they do address those overall 5 or 6 kind of overarching goals that we had. So I think, could I defend that, explain it? Yes. Could it have been explained better? Could I have gotten out in front of it in a better way? Yes. If you're looking for some commitment for me to do that personally going forward, I can make that commitment. If you think it's something that needs to be legislated in policy in order for it to be enforced, as opposed to me committing to it personally, that's certainly your role as trustees. And as I was reminded at some point today, ultimately how I carry out that role, you will judge me on that, and I'll either have a job going forward or I won't have a job going forward, and I'm okay with that too.
So Trustee DeRosa and then Trustee Guzzo. I didn't know you had a question, but we'll put you in after
just a comment,
Trustee
really.
DeRosa.
I think this issue, whether policy or no policy, is on all of us, just by default. Okay? I fundamentally believe that, it is a very well, my kids grew up in that community, so I know the community quite well. My kids went to the school. It's a very caring group of parents. But if I look at it from the point of view of the actual decision itself, I keep coming back to the fact that we've got to somehow strike a proper balance between letting our competent staff and Director Daly, at the end of the day, manage the operation. I see this discussion as just as another way to infringe or for lack of a better word, tie the operation in people's hands. And I don't think that that'll serve, if we end up doing that inadvertently by the decisions we make here, I don't think that'll serve the general well-being of our primary purpose, and that is to take care of the kids. We've got to have an operation that is allowed to manage the best way they can. There will be mistakes. The communication piece was a mistake. But we know it, we acknowledge it, and steps are going to be taken to correct it. It doesn't put into question the actual decision itself, in my view. Go ahead.
Thank you, Trustee DeRosa, Trustee Intomasi, and then Trustee Guzzo.
So, through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Carabella, in her pursuit to get some sort of policy here to deal with minority needs or fulfilling minority needs, it seems to me that there was a committee composition made up of, for the French programming, that included trustees, teachers, principals, board members, board staff, that is, parents and students. There were 7 meetings that took place. Parents were at all those meetings. As such, everybody was on hand. Was the total community aware of this looming change? Perhaps not. But again, I'll have to go back to what Trustee DeRosa said, and that is that it's purely operational. French is noted as being a moving target, which means it goes to the schools that has the the youngest families, we cannot policy that. It's not our role to do that. As such, I would say to not even consider any policies until such time that we are looking at our budget and know how much money we can put towards any program for special needs right up to French. Because we have to remember, as Trustee Murphy said, there is the general population that we have to look after. And we as trustees are bound by looking after the needs of our whole board and all the constituents within.
Thank you, Trustee Ann Tomasi. Would you like to go over? Okay. I would just like to circle back to what Director Daly said. I don't believe, and in keeping with Trustee Murphy about looking at everybody as a whole, is that maybe the bigger piece of this is a communication piece, and that we look at something through a policy on how we bring things out and roll things out to our parent population and our primary stakeholders, and then this way we're not satisfying one small group, and we're not interfering with the operations. However, we are looking at a piece that is consistent, and that makes us all on the same page in regards to communication. That's just my comment and suggestion. I'm going to do Director Daly and then Trustee Agnew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just going to, again, maybe this addresses the question that Trustee Agnew had earlier that I didn't respond to directly. So what have we learned and what are we going to do going forward? Short of, me saying I'm committed to it, maybe it is part of that public engagement policy where, certainly in terms of our strategic plan, and Trustee Carabella would know this because she was part of developing that 5-year plan, one of the pillars was around how we engage and how we communicate better with our ratepayers, with our staff, with everybody in the board. So to put together, to commit to timely communications, best practices on a go-forward basis in a way that is open and in a way that people can understand. I think if we're identifying a communication problem in this instance, and to be quite honest with you, many of you, as you know, ran in the previous election based on probably the issue of a lack of communication or transparency around decisions that have been made in the past. So I think it would probably fit into the commitment that I think probably all of you made in your election campaigns to ratepayers around seeking input and trying to get out in front of things and having people informed in a timely manner.
That's essentially, thank you for that through you, Madam Chair. So, I agree with Trustee Murphy that, the decision was the decision, and whether it was 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that was, there was not going to be, the decision was not going to be accepted the way that it was, and it wouldn't be taken lightly. But I do think that at least we would be able to feel confident that the communication piece was there, that we could at least stand up and say, agree, this was, an operational decision. I understand that you're not thrilled with that or you're not in agreement of that, but I know that we could stand there and say that at least we had given appropriate notice, whatever that looks like. We had engaged our stakeholders, whatever that looked like. We had given them a time frame. We had given them something. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, that's what I would be looking for, is if we can better that piece. So thank you for that, Director Daly, and it sounds like that is in the works. Is that policy being considered now? Is that being created? But maybe that's, sorry. So not to put you on the spot, but I do think that could be a good, at least, first step in this.
So I think we're at the point where if there's no further discussion, we need to now decide whether or not this stays on as a discussion item, or if we put this onto the next policy meeting as an action item. So we can bring this back for further discussion to the next policy meeting and maybe look at it from I guess maybe, how about I put it in two phases? We can look at it as presented as a discussion item by Trustee Carabella, which is discussing further about a policy development regarding optional programs, or we can look at further discussion in regards to a policy in regards to communication with our ratepayers. Director Dale.
Just, because it sounds like Trustee Carabella's done a little bit of legwork on this. For the boards that you've identified, some boards that have policies around it, I'd appreciate if you could send them to me so I can do a little less legwork, so I can at least get my head around it. I'd suggest too that, and this is just a suggestion, it's really for our group here. I think that was a very a worthwhile discussion. And a reasonable discussion that we've had tonight. I think it's helpful, or I think it would be helpful for me and maybe for other people around the table that when we want to bring discussion items that we give a little bit more background explanation as to what the item is, so we can put some thought into it, even if we have a discussion item, here's a bit of a descriptor around what the item is so people get a week or two to start to formulate some thoughts, and then once it comes to the table, maybe there's a takeaway to bring back. Maybe there's some direction to staff to bring back additional information, or maybe on certain issues it would be, we've had the discussion, we really don't get a sense that amongst the room there's an appetite to go further on it. But I think that'd be helpful for everybody at least to be able to maybe bring more to the initial conversation. That's just a suggestion.
Trustee DeRosa.
Certainly, I think that this discussion has been fruitful and would support a continued discussion. But so long under the circumstances so that we separate, we continue a discussion on how to better communicate and separate the decision that in fact has been taken on St. Matthews as a separate issue.
This program, this policy going forward is not about assessing or deciding or anything about that particular issue.
Right. Yeah. Because I'd just like to finish with one comment on that. As new trustees who have taken over situations, we in fact offered the opportunity to the St. Matthews community to redelegate even after a decision was made. And that was honestly in the spirit of openness and the commitments we made for better communication during our campaigns. We're all committed to that. So I'd like for people to recognize the fact that the delegation that we accepted in our first meeting was a gesture to listen to them again. There was no guarantee that the decision necessarily would have been reversed.
Sorry, so I think to go back just to what Trustee Carabella said, she's not looking to make a motion on St. Matthews. Okay. She's looking to create policy for future situations that may come up, but that are linked directly to optional programming. Correct? The motion that's on the table for the board meeting is separate to this. So, but sorry, Trustee Murphy.
Commenting on Director Daly's suggestion, is this something we can enact as a procedure that we're going to agree on, or do we need to make a motion that when we're introducing discussion items in our meetings that there is a summation page submitted with it or some kind of background that we could prepare and better equip ourselves to and discuss it intelligently or semi-intelligently, depending?
So under the bylaws, it talks to delegations and the timelines that they're required to give forward. I think we could probably look at some sort of terms of reference for discussion points on deadlines for agenda items so that we're all made aware so that we can speak to things and come a little bit more prepared. I think that's something we can deal with as a group, and maybe we can put some sort of guideline. We can put down together, I'll work with Superintendent Ballo and Director Daly in regards to putting some sort of terms of reference if we can bring it forward to our next policy meeting, if we're all in agreement in creating that. So this way we can, when discussion points come up, we can have, for example, the information that you've prepared in advance so that we know what you're talking about. Does that sound? Okay, so we can put that forward in as an, Vince, sorry, I keep saying Vince. Trustee Ian Tomasi, did you want this?
You, Madam Chair. It seems to me that we need to get away from so-and-so is doing and it's written and I've researched. I think we need to have the items that somebody is using to support their argument, the facts in front of us, and circulated before the meeting so that we're all acting on the same, or we're all on the same page and reacting to like information.
Thank you, Trustee Ian Tomasi. I think that goes in line with what we just kind of discussed, which is creating a terms of reference. So maybe we can even go one step further, is that in working towards the next policy meeting, we can have it out in advance for a discussion item, and then if something comes out of that, so this way everybody can have an opportunity. Sorry, so the terms of reference, we can address that in that piece, and then we can discuss it as a group and see whether or not we like it, and then we can adopt it for meetings going forward. Director Daly, are you?
I'm quite impressed with the enthusiasm of the group. Like I said, I think this has been a good discussion. I think I would remind everyone that we are on our second policy committee meeting, and we've had maybe 2 board meetings. So we do have some time to get our procedures in place going forward that we're going to use over the next 4 years. So I would suggest we, bite off what we can and work together and keep moving forward. So whether or not we get it done by the next meeting, and we don't want to leave things completely open-ended, but like I said, I think it's great that we do want to move forward and we can see where we can make some progress, but I don't want to say pump the brakes a little bit, but we might need to just move in a measured sort of way.
So maybe just a point to that. So maybe what we could do, in the spirit of, collaboration and making sure that we're all on the same page, is in the absence of having a defined terms of reference over the next few meetings, if we are going to have an item for discussion and there is a reference to a document or another piece, it would just be great, I think, to just include that. It wouldn't necessarily be formal as per, like we said, that established terms of reference, which might take a little bit of time to do, but I do think would be helpful, if you are going to reference something, that we can say, yeah, okay, I see what you're talking about, or I see it, or I think it would just be a nice thing to have, so perhaps we could just do that until we have everything formalized, if that's...
I agree.
Trustee Carabella, then Director Dave.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. This is my first time also proposing something like this, and sort of like, searching just recently, and I didn't know about sending it out, so going forward.
Director Daly.
And just to remind the group as well, we do have our bylaws, our procedures are up for discussion prior to the end of this year. So in terms of in terms of our procedures, our procedural bylaws, we are reviewing them this year as well. So some of those changes, if in fact we do want to make changes, would happen there as well. And I'd suggest also for those trustees who are able to attend the trustee module, the training that's going on next week. There is a little bit on kind of parliamentary and procedure. That might be something that we might want to think about as well moving forward. And for those who aren't going to be there, we can certainly bring that information back and share it as a group as well, I think.
So Trustee.
Very quickly, one closing comment. I think, to summarize, if we adopt a no-surprise policy and try to document what we want to talk about for inclusion into the package and distribution for everybody's benefit, I think we will accomplish the essence of what we're talking about, notwithstanding the fact that the terms of reference will be a good thing to develop in due course. But immediately, if we think of each other and say, okay, well, I want to talk about something, I should probably document it and help bring everybody up to speed for inclusion in the in the package. Thank you.
Okay, so I would propose then that we continue that Trustee Carabella distribute the information that you've collected to the remainder of us trustees, and that this can go on for a discussion item for the next policy meeting, and that we will look into creating a terms of reference over the next couple of meetings. Okay, are we okay to move on to, okay, excellent. So we're going to move on to information items. Privacy procedure is item 5.1, I believe. Sorry, where did I lost? I went over here. Here we go, 5.1, which is procedure VI-81, privacy procedure. Ms. Vieira?
I'm not sure if you had a chance to review the procedure. It, again, is because we have this procedure in place, we're going to rescind cross-panel sharing, and we've created a separate privacy breach protocol. The procedure is aligning now with the 10 privacy principles that other school boards have adopted, and I think as a board we've adopted it in our past procedure, but now I've just kind of put the headers there so that it's more defined. So it's really a lot of moving around of what was already there under the new headings, just so that it's clear that we're following those privacy standards that have been outlined in that PIM toolkit I talked to you about earlier. Are there any questions around the procedure?
Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I just noticed that it was only adopted 1 year ago. So what happened in that year that would now take it away?
I think there were some changes around the personal health information protocol, and I've kind of reverted back to the MFIPA way of doing things. So I think that's where the changes were happening specifically. So I've cleaned up some of that wording in the procedure just to give more guidance under MFIPA versus the PHIPA piece. I think that was something the board was dealing with, or administration was dealing with back in the day.
Thank you. I'm sorry, just to clarify, that dealt with item 5.2 as well, right? Correct? The new procedure?
Yeah, the privacy breach. Privacy breach procedure is now its own procedure. It used to be in the old procedure for privacy, the privacy procedure. Now privacy breach is its own procedure, and cross-panel sharing has been rescinded because it is included in the privacy procedure.
Okay, thank you. So we've moved on then to item 5.4. Which is procedure VI-44, progressive discipline and safety in schools. Superintendent Crowell.
Yeah, so the changes that we made in the procedure were just to reflect the changes in the policy, and we did make some changes. We took out some of the documentation that was required to be sent to the ministry earlier in the previous iterations was done paper copy to the ministry. It's now done electronically, so we had to be able to take that part of the procedure out.
Thank you. Questions, Trustee Carabella?
I just don't see that in red somewhere. Did you point that out in red or not?
Those ones aren't in red. It's actually at the very end of the document. There was a previous paper form that principals had to fill out for a violent incident within schools. That information is collected electronically now, so it doesn't appear. It's just an appendix that was taken out.
So Trustee O'Brien, then Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Superintendent Crowell. There was a time when a teacher dealt with bullying during the day, and if anything occurred outside of school time, it was considered outside their realm. The whole cyberbullying has put a new spin to that. So my question is, if a student posts something that is hurtful to another student, say in the room at night, it appears the next day, still it's there kind of in a timeless space. Is that child that posted it the night before, are they still subject to progressive discipline?
Yes. So in the ministry definition talks about cyberbullying as part of bullying. It gives us a clear definition of cyberbullying. That's in our policy. It's in our procedure.
Okay.
We'd say that there's a nexus to the school because there's sort of the students know each other through the school, that the school does have authority to deal with that that as bullying.
Okay, so whatever the time, it will still go through progressive discipline.
Correct.
Thank you.
Trustee O'Brien, can you just turn off your mic? Thank you. No, just because Trustee Ian Tomasi won't be able to hear. Trustee Carabello.
Thank you. I think just going forward, if we could, any changes that are made in the procedures, that they are made in red so that it stands out when we're reading it, so that we would notice it the same way the changes are made in policies.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do not provide the procedures with the red line version. We provide them as the final draft of the version, and we go through them as information items, and we're here readily available to answer any of the questions that you may have or to present any of the changes that have been made to the procedures.
Can I just,
Trustee Egg.
so just to clarify, because I think, so I understand what you're saying, because I find it helpful when we're looking at the policy. Because if I'm looking at the procedure and it's not being identified, even though I go through it and I read it, I won't necessarily know what that change is. So it would be easier for looking at the procedure to see what the changes are, if they've been marked in some way so that we can see what the changes were.
If I may. In the past, typically, because it's provided to you as an information item, it's not necessarily there for you to see what the decision was that was made, because it's an operational piece. So the senior staff have made the changes, and when they bring it here, when it's attached to a policy, they do indicate, as Superintendent Kroll said, the changes were in line with what was made in the policy. So it's not brought to you as a piece for discussion, it's brought to you as a piece for information. So typically in the past, that's what
so Trustee O'Brien and then Director.
My impression was that it was not just for information, but was for discussion as well. That was my impression that you said at the beginning of the meeting. That I know we're not going to vote on it, but we can still discuss it. That was what I heard.
If it's okay with the group, can I bring this back to the next meeting in terms of what we provide? Can I have that conversation with senior team? Okay.
Sorry, Trustee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question for Superintendent Kroll. Page 64, it says an employee is not Page 64 says an employee is not required to respond if responding would, in the case of bullying, cause immediate harm to himself or herself or that of the student or another person.
Yeah, that comes from okay, sure.
I understand totally that a teacher needs to stay safe. However, if he or she chooses to intervene only at a safe distance, what would that intervention look like? For example, if a teacher saw one student physically assaulting another, what can that teacher do to stop the abuse while still remaining safe?
So I think what we're saying there is that if a teacher or a staff member felt that they were in imminent risk by interfering directly, then they would seek support. So either calling for school administration or calling the police if we're talking about like a violent incident. So the staff are not compelled to directly physically interfere, but they're certainly called to act. And act would be getting help, calling support, calling the police. You know, that's the intent of that. Okay.
Moving on to the next item, 5.5, Procedure VI-40, Request for Promotion and Distribution of Program Activity-Related Materials through Board Schools. Superintendent Ballo.
Through you, there were no changes made to the procedure.
Thank you. 5.6, Procedure VI-13, Pediculosis or head lice management. Superintendent Ballo.
There were minor changes that were made to the procedure, just some consistency around language throughout the document. The references were moved to meet the new format. The only other change worth mentioning is that there were 2 letters that had been embedded within the procedure that schools would use to communicate, and we removed them because they change from time to time, and then we continually have to change the procedure because we have the letter embedded in there.
Okay, so moving on to the next information item, 5.7, Procedure VI-68, Medications, Oral, Prescriptions, Non-Prescription, Superintendent Ballo.
Sorry, I've got a few tonight. There were little to no changes with respect to that procedure. Again, just moving one of the policies to the references.
Any questions or good? Okay, 5.8, Procedure VI-71, Concussion Protocol, Superintendent Ballo.
Through you, Madam Chair, we made the addition of the Rowan's Law, which was a new law that was passed at the beginning of the school year, so it's included in the references, and the resources have been updated accordingly. Minimal changes.
Thank you. 5.9, Procedure VI-79, Indoor Air Quality Investigation Process. Superintendent Ballo, because you're the only one here.
I'm the only one. Oh, I will speak to it. So 2 changes that were made. First of all, one of them is just around the consistency of the role and the title that's referenced. So throughout the document, we refer to maintenance, custodian, facilities, manager, so the language there was made more consistent. Superintendent Merrick was involved in updating this procedure. And the other change is number 7 with respect to health and safety representation and the role of our committee member. And our health and safety officer, Kim George, was also involved in collaborating in this procedure.
Item 5.10, Procedure VI-61, Recognition and Acknowledgement of Dignitaries, Board Officials at Board and School Events. Director Daly or Superintendent Ballo?
You want to? I'm ready. Through you, Madam Chair, there was only 1 change under the requirements. It was just specifically added. It used to say RSVPs will be expected. Now it says respectively to dignitaries and board officials. It's just more specific as to who needs to RSVP. That's the only change.
Thank you. 5.11, Procedure VI-39, Inclement Weather Safety. Superintendent.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. I have lots of procedures. References were added. So under our reference list, most of the references are connected to OFIA. More detail was added to the existing areas that are included within the procedure with the varying weather conditions. And the only item that was added as new and not just revised was number 8, wind velocity. So in working with my curriculum leads, that was something that was required by them for our weather conditions policy because they're the ones that are making the calls around football games and outdoor events. So we really felt it was important to include that as well within our inclement weather safety and give them the guidelines about when to call a game and when not to call a game. So that was page 5 of 6 in that procedure, number 8. Otherwise, it was just amendments to existing weather conditions that we already had in our procedure. Yes?
Okay, sorry. Director Daly, then Trustee O'Brien.
Does everybody know what OPA is? It's reference quite a bit. Ontario Physical Health Educators Association, so it's the provincial health organization.
Thank you. We'll add it to the list of acronyms that we're memorizing. Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to the Director. On page 146, it gives the website for inclement weather. I notice that sometimes bus companies stop running when schools remain open. Is this because they use a different criteria or website for weather? Superintendent Daly.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I notice that sometimes the bus companies stop running when schools remain open. Is this because they use a different criteria for inclement weather than us?
No. If we liaise with the bus companies in the morning to see whether they can adequately make their runs. If the bus company can't make their run, then we may cancel busing. Depending on the rest of it, why a bus can't get down a street could be different than if a parent can get out of the street. So a bus is 26 feet long, potentially with 40 kids on it. Depending on how the street's plowed and snow drifts, et cetera, they might not be able to load students on. So determining whether or not a bus can make the run and whether or not deemably a parent can make the run with a car are two different things, yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Daly. That being the case, I notice that the days of buses are canceled and schools are open. Many parents drive their children to school, thus creating more traffic around the schools in poor weather conditions. This often creates unsafe conditions. So my question, when deciding about school closures, would it be possible to have yourself make kind of a more unilateral decision with this bus companies so that you both ought to remain open or both ought to remain closed, working together as a team, of course?
The bus companies wouldn't determine whether or not we keep schools open, and ultimately with regards to parents feeling safe or unsafe transporting their students to school, they can make that determination on their own whether or not they want to either have their student walk or drive them to school.
Trustee Dewar?
Madam Chair, I have a question here regarding this policy. Item number 8, wind velocity was added to this procedure. Just wanted to know how we communicate these changes to schools, principals, teachers, and how in particular do we measure this wind velocities and speeds, and what guidelines do the school teachers and principals have?
Through you, Madam Chair. So when we make changes to policies and procedures, we do communicate that out to the school principal who disseminates the information. So on a monthly basis following these meetings, I develop a memo that says these are the policies that were reviewed or approved this month, and these are the amendments that were made, and that pertains to procedures as well, so that the information gets to the school level, and then they share that information accordingly so that they can make any adjustments. The information would be from the Weather Network, so they are going onto the Weather Network, reliable sources, to determine what the wind velocity would be, what any of the weather conditions are, wind chill, etc.
Thank you, Superintendent Ballo. So moving on to item 5.12 for information. This is a list of the upcoming items for our February 12th, 2019 Policy Committee meeting. Superintendent Ballo, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I don't have anything to add. The list is there for the upcoming agenda items. The one thing I did want to add, sort of circling back, when you came in this evening, you would have received the policy review cycle, and we didn't talk about that. We had made an adjustment. I had provided you a draft in December of this chart to help guide our thinking. One change was made. I believe it was Trustee Antomasi who had brought forward the policy being redundant. And in the old version, it said that if we want to rescind a policy, that we would bring it to a board meeting and it would be a simple majority. And looking into that further and in consultation with Director Daly as we were looking at our governance policy, it is actually in our bylaw that you need 2/3 of the majority to rescind the policy. So that has been reflected in the version that you have, that at the bottom says revised January 2019.
Thank you, Superintendent Ballo. So we're going to move on to miscellaneous items or information. There is no miscellaneous information. Item 7, in camera. There's no in-camera discussion. No? Okay. So we're moving to, we don't need a motion to excuse absent committee members. Everybody is present. So item 9, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Everybody together. Trustee Dewar, can I have a seconded by Trustee Murphy. There we go, you got it today. All in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you. I now ask Trustee DeRosa, I believe, to lead us in a closing prayer.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, as we come to the end of our time together, we thank you for what has been accomplished here today. May we leave here recognizing that you, the Lord, you are God, and all the wisdom, and we are willing to lead, us forward. This we pray in the name of the Lord Jesus. Amen.